Hi, my name is Russell Pirkle, and the dialect that I will be presenting today is Gullah, also known as Gullah Geechee. The Gullah dialect is primarily found in the South Carolina and Georgia coastline, a little bit up into the North Carolina coastline, and just a little bit down into Florida as well. The population estimate for speakers of Gullah is a very wide range, as you can see here. As little as 300 dialect speakers remain today, or possibly as many as 250,000. I think the main reason for this discrepancy in numbers is how do you count the speakers of the dialect exactly? Do you include only those who have let's say, fluency as their first dialect, or do you count all people who have some cultural influence from Gullah and some use of some of the features of the dialect in their language? Gullah is a language spoken primarily by the descendants of slaves in the Americas. The history of the language can be a little bit complicated to trace, but it seems that there's evidence that this language may have actually originated in West Africa. And sometimes I'll say here dialect, sometimes language. And there's some debate over whether Gullah should be considered a completely different language from English or whether it's simply a dialect of English. But anyways, this language has a history of about 300 years, and it was seemed to have started in West Africa during the British slave trade, in which um, the British would need to speak to African slave traders there, and they developed this kind of pidgin language to be able to communicate with each other for commerce. This language, of course, then spread to the enslaved people themselves, and then also even between different tribes, different language speakers, different countries in Africa. It's so very useful to have this. So it was a kind of lingua franca for them as well, because they all spoke different languages, different dialects themselves many times. But this kind of English Creole was a sort of a language that they all knew something of. So the language actually thrived in Western Africa before it even moved to the Americas at all. The country where it seems to be primarily used and born in was Sierra Leone, although other countries like Liberia and Angola would have used the language as well. This dialect was discovered in the 1930s and 1940s by Lorenzo Dow Turner. He was a linguist working at South Carolina College. And before his work, people thought that Gullah was just a broken English and uneducated form of English, somehow inferior, not quite not quite the English of people who were speaking effectively and eloquently, you know. Um, and what Turner did was he recognized that there were many influences from African languages, and many words actually borrowed from African languages in Gullah. And so he argued that this was evidence that this language is actually not just an inferior, not just a messed up version of English. This is actually a Creole blending African and English languages together. Beyond just his importance to Gullah itself, Gullah became a very important language for linguistics because this kind of shaped and influenced Creole studies, African American language dialect studies that came later. So actually, in fact, the discovery and study of Gullah was a very important, let's say, building block or centerpiece for all of the dialectical language acceptance, appreciation, and understanding that we have today. So actually, really, really great thing. So why is Gullah still relevant if the numbers are declining? And of course, granted, it's a somewhat small region in the first place. Well, even if you're not teaching in or working as an SLP in South Carolina, obviously there's lots of linguistic importance to Gullah. This is a language which is both a huge influence on African American English generally. A lot of the heritage of African American English as a dialect is very much intertwined with Gullah, many of the same pathways here. And then obviously also this is has really huge connections to the Caribbean, the Bahamas, Jamaica. So studying Gullah generally is a great window into these other broader dialects as well. And also, of course, it's a window into the history of the heritage of our students and patients who have ancestors in the slave trade, have ancestors or connections in the Black American community. And this is a part of history which I think the documentation is not so complete. So I think these linguistic we could say fossils or remnants are a really great window into seeing, okay, what was the origin of this culture? What cultures were they connected to in Africa, in the Indies, etc. So as far as the actual phonetic and linguistic features of the language, we see many things that, again, we also can see in lots of other Caribbean and African American English dialects. One is that the theta sound here, no, I'm sorry, the theta sound and the eth sound both get kind of alveolarized a bit, right? So the sound often becomes a duh, as we can hear here.
The Lord is my shepherd. I ain't gonna want. He make me for lay down in them green pasture.
The theta sound becomes a t in many cases here, as we can see in this one.
It threw mouth.
The H in its initial position is often elided, which just means the he perhaps becomes just e, or his becomes just is, etc. And then in many cases, a V sound becomes labialized to just a B sound, right? So V becomes B, and we'll see it here in this word, heaven.
Our Father, who art in heaven.
And in that same text, we can hear there oftentimes the R-colored vowels are elided as well. So instead of father, we get father, but which of course also with that duh sound. So we end up with fada. There's a lot of elision in the language generally as well. So elision meaning the leaving out or the cutting out of parts of a word. So this oftentimes happens in whole syllables, especially if they are initial and unstressed. So disciple here becomes disciple, together becomes geta, around becomes round, because cause, courage, encourage. And here we can see I found one example in some modern Gullah speakers here. Remote became here mote, or even moke for moke control, from remote control. So let's try to hear that real quick here.
What do you use to change channels on TV?
My grandma used to call that thing the clicker.
I call them remote control.
The
Remote control.
The remote control.
Remote control.
Final letters in words may be omitted as well. So and becomes an, around, round, more, mo, what, wa, world becoming here, wo. and over becomes oba. I found one example here, field becoming feel. So let's listen for that. And this again, interesting speaker here too. He is a modern speaker, but as you can see here, a bit older. And so he is a bit more in the heritage of the language.
Well, in Mackinac County, we used to plant rice here. This whole field we used to plant.
This whole field we used to plant. I have one more example here, chest becoming chess.
There's people, let me tell you something. If I had this here on my chest.
On my chest. And here you see, of course, Sun Im Sho, this Harvard professor and Gullah native speaker there. Okay, so as far as the syntactic features, the grammatical changes from English to Gullah, differences here. In many cases, there is no plural S. Oftentimes, the plural is simply marked by a dim, almost like the word them or those before the word instead. I think this one was a bit difficult to hear, but let's check this out. See if you can hear. If I remember correctly, this is a woman, and she's going to say here, dem ting, rather than those things.
Oro was that singing it like the band had been $2. That sing with a swanny winging it a punch one sir. Trying to go away to shut them ting up.
It's probably a little bit simpler here to catch dimbruka or dimbukra. Bukra is a Gullah word for white people. So let's listen for that as well.
And go over there for play them bucker them.
Dem buckra dem. Of course, once again, that dem there to indicate that was the plural. In the case of the negatives, so here they often use ain't, or rather elided a little bit to just ain't nobody got worry. And then they also often use a lot of no rather than really using not at all. So let's listen for an example of those.
And they thought to themselves, ain't gonna be no slave yet.
Come on, yeah.
Ain't gonna be no slaves. Yeah. Double negatives, very common in the Gullah language. So, of course, in standard English, we have this rule against using a double negative, but many other languages in the world, including Italian, Spanish, and here the Gullah dialect as well, double negatives can often be used to add extra emphasis rather than to, somehow negate your own negation. As for comparatives, rather than having a more or er ending, oftentimes they will use instead just mo na, and superlatives demoris instead. All right, so let's look at some additional things here. So verb tense, probably the most important in some sense aspect of the language, but also a little bit difficult to, let's say, completely examine or completely delineate the differences there, because there's some variation as well. So in one case, I took a look here and I found some examples of tenses that they didn't here try to make an equivalent in standard English. Now, the important thing here is that there's really no exact equivalences. This is actually one of the big heritages from the African languages, which is that the verb tense system is logically a bit different. Standard English, we have a very time-based verb tense system. Is it happening in the future, the present, the past? Gullah is more what I've seen called durative. This is more based on duration, on completion. Have they finished yet? Have they been doing it a long time, a short time? It's more relative to other things in the context of the conversation, rather than these absolute senses of present, past, future. So in some cases, we can see been here used to indicate past tense. I done helped them. I'd been helped them. We can see beenna for past continuous. Beenna helped them. We can see done here for perfect tense. Done helped them. We can see de for present continuous. They helped them. And we can say gwen or gwine for a future tense, right? Very similar to going to in some sense. Gwen helped them. Now, all those in mind, we're going to see here from Sun Im Sho a slightly different set to convey some slightly different senses of time relationships.
Peace. We're glad you want to ask me this question, because the reason that we Gullah get you people to use done with sentence and random. To the contrary, it establishes verb tense. More specifically, past continuous, present perfect, and present progressive. The Gullah continuous, past, present, and future verb tenses of your example sentence would be what we da do, what we a do, what we a do, what we ga do.
So as you can see there, totally different let's say auxiliary verbs there to indicate similar, but in some cases different tenses as well. So the important takeaways is one, they're really describing a different logic of verb tense from what we have in standard English. And this is very important because again, coming back to the sense of, is this a substandard or stupid way of talking? No, it's not. It's actually conceptualizing time in a totally different way. And the other important lesson we can take from these verb tenses in Gullah is that these are also very similar to the verb tenses that we get in African American English, in the Caribbean Englishes, Jamaican, etc. So once again, it's a kind of a window or a way in to see what is the logic of the grammar when we hear things like he be dressing or something like that in the broader context of speakers of English with African heritage. Now, there are actually quite a few, as we talked about, Dr. Turner found quite a few loan words from African dialects, primarily these in Sierra Leone, to Gullah. So we can see here a few here that, of course, we won't really recognize at all in standard English, but there actually are a few that we do recognize very well too, and we'll see those in a moment. So here we see things like Gafa for evil spirit, Defu for rice flour, Do for child, Kome for gather together, Bukra for white man, as I talked about before, Biddy for a small chicken. Let's see, what else? Da for mother, interestingly enough, A for yes, hoodoo for bad luck, kuta for turtle, tata for father, uni for you, and of course yam for sweet potato. So we see some here that actually have become loan words to standard English as well. So interesting ones too, of course. So tote, as in the tote bag. This was originally an African word that was adapted to Gullah, that was adapted to English from there. Bad mouth, I included here. Obviously, these are English words, but this is a kind of an idiomatic or dialectical expression from Gullah that, of course, now it's pretty common to hear in English to say he was bad-mouthing me or something, to say that he was saying bad things about me. Kumbaya, the song. This is directly from these Sierra Leone African languages. Yam to mean something like a sweet potato. This is adapted from these African languages. And even the word bling, this is a Gullah word that's been adopted into African American English more broadly. And even I'd say now it's fairly standard English as well. Again, to reiterate, so Gullah, very important language just because of its connection to American history, connection to the culture that we've ended up here in the United States. And also, as we see from this page here, we get a little bit of a sense of the connection from African American English and Gullah and the Caribbean Englishes to standard English. I think we oftentimes think of African American English and the other dialects, such as Gullah, as something that's been adapted and changed from standard English. But here, I think it's also very, very important for us to keep in mind that this is a two-way flow. Right. So many things from these dialects influence the standard English we speak in America and even the rest of the world as well. So these studying languages like dialects like Gullah help us to comprehend the way that our own language works, the way that standard English works as well. All right, thank you.